Okay, very good afternoon to everyone. It's a pity I cannot be with you, but at least I can see you, and I see quite a lot of people in the room. So very nice to have the opportunity to come in the conference after 2 very intense days. We are now at the end, and we're now moving from academic sessions to policy debate. In line with the main topic of the conference, this policy session will focus on social inclusion and basically how these two big shocks, first the pandemic and then the war in Ukraine, are producing effects on society, on people, and especially on the most vulnerable people. To discuss these topics, we have an excellent panel of speakers. I think there is a lot of complementarity between them, so I'm very much looking forward to hear your thoughts. Before we open, let me just say a couple of words on the context. So 2020, we thought it was probably one of the worst years in quite a few decades. The pandemic, of course, had a huge impact on people on global scale. It had an impact on people on many different dimensions. So eating health, so really something which was felt by everyone, fear, concerns, and a big economic impact. And then this year, 2022, basically another big shock. So the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and quite a lot of changes on global scales, of course, in terms of geopolitical relations and equilibria, but also big impact in terms of dramatic increase in food and energy prices. And once again, these changes had an impact basically on people, on society. So changes felt by everyone, and even more by most vulnerable groups. Because of course, we know that especially food takes a larger share of income of those people who have low income. And in this sense, certain groups of society, certain people, or certain regions of the world have been more largely affected. And this, the fact that we had these two huge shocks, basically one after the other, is raising questions which actually have been around for quite some time. In the EMANES, when it was still EMANES, we had discussion about the issue of how to increase resilience in society and how to make sure that social inclusion remains a key objective. And this becomes even more important when we see that society is hit by shocks, and that some groups of people have to pay consequences or have to suffer consequences in a most pronounced way. So it is against this background that the question I would like to put on the table is, how can we make sure that social inclusion remains a key policy objective, and it also is a reality? And related to this is really, how can we make sure that social inclusion can happen? And this opens the door actually to a lot of issues, for instance, to social protections, so to the existence of social safety nets, and how they can be put in place where they do not exist, how they can be maintained. And on this, I think the experience of Europe, it is of help in the sense that these two shocks have made clear that the countries which have good safety nets actually had the possibility to react to the shocks in a better way, and with lower effects on people and society at large. So it is basically with these questions in mind that I would like to open with the first intervention. And I would like to give the floor to Najat and to Yeganeh. So Najat Mekkaoui, she's professor at University of Paris Dauphine, and Yeganeh Forouheshfar, sorry for the pronunciation, is a researcher of EMEAN. They have done some work and they have this idea of preparing a dashboard, a set of indicators on social inclusion. So very much looking forward to hear your thoughts and what you have done. Yeganeh and Najat, floor is yours.
Thank you, Cinzia. So it's a real pleasure to start this policy debate, and very happy to be here in person. So this morning we had the launch of the TRIS dashboard, where social inclusion is one of the pillars for inclusive growth and a sustainable system. An inclusion system is a very complex one, and we are going to see it in a few minutes. So let's talk about social protection and why social protection. Social protection system is a fundamental mechanism and should not be seen as a cost, but as an investment in the economy. An investment in health, investment in education, investment to improve employment, investment to help people to have a decent job. And this investment have a huge impact on labor market performance. And this is on the left side. And we can see that this kind of mechanism is mainly linked to insurance mechanism. Social protection is also assistance mechanism. And now you can see on the right side, when a country can develop safety nets, this has also a very big impact on inequality, to reduce inequality, to reduce poverty, and then to lead to social inclusion. And social inclusion has a very huge impact on inclusive growth. So we have this virtuous circle, and we have a different study. Just to give you only one number, a country where safety nets are developed, they reduced by almost 2% the inequality in their country. And so by reducing, again, poverty and inequality, we get a very significant and positive impact on growth. And we have many studies dealing with this relationship with this impact, and we have this very good result. So if we the next slide, yeah, thank you. So if we only check the link between the coverage, social protection coverage, and poverty, so we can see that there are a very huge difference among countries. And for African countries, we have most African countries on the right side, where you can observe a very high level of poverty linked to a very low level of social protection coverage. And on the right side, you have mainly European countries with a very high level of social protection coverage, and also a very low level of poverty. And this is only a very simple calculation, and we can see a very huge difference and impact on poverty. So now in different regions, you can observe that we have a very huge gap between developed and developing countries. And again, on the right side, we have mainly European countries. We have many OECD countries with almost 100 of their population that have at least one social protection benefit. And they also have a very different mechanism linked to a social safety net. And we can see that in African countries and also in Arab world, we have a very, very few people who get at least one social protection benefit and who get also a safety net. So yeah, thank you. So we have this very poor performance in African countries and in Arab countries because we have a large population is excluded because we have a large informality. So during the COVID-19, we have seen that different countries did a very great effort to support their population. But until now, unfortunately, we still observe a very high level of informality rate and a very low level of social protection coverage. So, so the public funds are very limited in developing countries, and the debt level in countries is already high in Arab countries and also in African countries, and this leaves a very limited room for government adjustment. So with the Ukraine war, in addition to the COVID-19, this exacerbated the situation by contributing to already raising inflation rate and putting an extra pressure on food and energy prices. So in this context, extending social protection system is very challenging for many countries and mainly developing countries, the African countries and Middle East and North African countries. But even more in this context, social protection must be considered as an important part of any comprehensive policy strategy to fight poverty, inequality, to push for a decent job, and to lead social inclusion. So because social inclusion has different dimension, and we saw it this morning, so it's multi-dimension concept. So we need to have specific tool tracking education, employment, social protection performance, gender gaps, financial inclusion for policy analysis and setting of public policy target. So I give the floor to Yeganeh, and Yeganeh will show you that the dashboard that we are currently building to track and to follow social inclusion.
Thanks, Najat. I continue here your intervention based on so now we realize how important it is to have this social inclusion. And I mean, we have the definition by the World Bank, focusing on the ability and opportunity and dignity for the disadvantaged people in our society, to empower them and, make them live their lives in a decent way. And as you said, it's a very multidimensional concept of social inclusion by itself. So we know we need to focus. It's an important context. We need to. It's a very functional, and for a functional and cohesive society, we need to focus on that, and we need to evaluate it, and we need to monitor it. So our goal is to develop a multidimensional index for social inclusion and well-being. And that's very useful for policy analysis and also to set public policy targets and so on. So here's the index we have thought about. And the idea is to have an index very holistic, taking into account all the, as I said, as Najat was mentioning, multifacets and all of the dimensions we can think of within the social inclusion. Of course, one of the first pillar is social protection, but we should not limit ourselves to social protection. Once we talk about social inclusion, income security matters, health matters, education, labor market situation, enabling environment, and by enabling environment, I mean, we add all the governance indicators, like the level of World Bank governance indicators, basically. Ease of doing business, and so on. And also financial inclusion matters, gender equality. We had this discussion about women empowerment, and also access to infrastructure, which can be like access to water, electricity, food, but also like transportation, roads, and digital infrastructure, and so on. And also we had two other pillars, which may not be very obvious, like culture and also climate and environment. Why? First of all, we had this discussion in the previous, once we launched the TRIS dashboard. I think it was Salvador, he mentioned the importance of accessing art in health and brain health. You know, culture has a very direct, and it's proven in the literature, impact within the well-being and health of the society. Climate and environment, I think it's also very important. Probably we don't see it at the very beginning, but then it's a very important pillar, because we are seeing that this climate crisis is happening, the risk is going up, and we want to capture all sorts of risk human can face in their lives within this index. So that's the globally the structure of the index. These are the goals to measure and monitor the status of this complex issue of social inclusion, to identify the main challenges and opportunity we have, both at country level and at regional level, to see who are excluded people, to do some comparative analysis between countries and region, to analyze the performance of each pillar, the pillars I've mentioned, and to monitor the progress towards a more inclusive society. And this would be a basis for coherent policy recommendations, of course. So this is a dashboard, which is a working in progress. I put the link here, but then let me show you how does it look like, actually. Okay. On the internet right now. As I say, it's a work in progress, so I'm very eager to hear about your comments. If you think another indicator should be added or another pillar, please, I'm all ears. So here's the concept. So the dashboard, the main pillars are, without surprise, the main pillars of the index. So now we have collected the data for the dashboard, but then we will use them to create this composite index for social inclusion. So you can click on each pillar, and then you have different dimensions within each pillar. So the focus right now is on European countries, Arab countries, and also Sub-Saharan Africa, or African countries. We have the coverage by type, universal healthcare coverage, and then coverage by type of risks that people face. So it's very interactive tool. You can choose the type of risk, and then, as I said, we can compare between different regions, and now we see, okay, these are European countries. They are doing pretty well in terms of coverage, and other, Arab and African countries are lagging behind. So it gives you, I'm done. It will be launched soon, and then income security is another important pillar. We have GDP per capita and also dependency ratio. So we have the definition, for instance, pops up here if you click on it. And then we have old age dependency and young age dependency. And as we can see, in the African and Europe is all inverse problems. We have aging population, but a huge share of youth in the African countries. About health measures, we have life expectancy at birth, healthy life expectancy, a mortality rate, but for infants, and also maternal mortality rate. And, it's very, the tool is very interactive. You can select. For education also, we have enrollment rates, but also we want to include indicators for the quality of the education, which is very important, and what's lacking in many countries. And then for the institution quality is basically an average of the governance indicators. And then we have for women empowerment, so economic participation, education, you have all of the pillars, health and survival, political empowerment. And, it's a work in progress. So for basic needs, we are developing digital access. We're adding also indicators for digital pricing and affordability, and also for food, water. and for culture, but then for climate as also, we are thinking through all of the indicators we can collect. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Yeganeh and Najat. Is super interesting. I'm really very interested in the topics you presented because it's part of my recent work as well. So I have some comments and maybe some suggestions, but we will come to this later on. I would like now to open the floor to the other speakers, and I would like to invite Raja Almarzoqi, Chief Economic Advisor at the Ministry of Economy and Planning in Saudi Arabia. And I would like to invite Raja to share his view, I guess, from more macroeconomic perspective. Raja, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks. It's excellent work. I like it. I think it's really important. We need it. We need to see it. We need it to be updated. It will affect how the policymaker as over time comparing countries. But I'll try now to link it to the macroeconomics, because the problem in our region, we talk about our region, the Middle East, mainly the main player is the government, which has bigger effect. And sometimes the government, they are not maximizing the welfare of people. They're maximizing their power, which has a negative impact on the economy and in the social inclusions and protections. In addition, you'll find also the role of NGO to the minimum. And the government, they do not, and the private sector is still weak and small, is not that big to contribute to the growth of the economy, and business environment, regulation, not up to date. That will help and attract to help the economy to grow and attract also FDI and local investors to invest in more long-term projects. You'll find across oil and non-oil producers, you'll find most of the investment, if not related to the government, is more a short-term side, which is reflect the risk they are facing. So with the limited resources in the government hand, with a small or net growing private sector and more in long-term investment and more complex projects that need skilled and semi-skilled labor, this will have effect on the social protections. So in this case, the number of people need social protections will be bigger in our region. And debt to GDP, as we can notice now, it's almost 100% in non-oil producers. Oil producers is almost around average 30% to 40%. But if you add all government liability, which is including quasi-government institutions, you'll find also oil producers, the debt to GDP reach maybe 70, 80% in some of these countries. So with this limitation, and also you have a pressure from the society, and you do not give more rooms for private sector or NGO to play the role that you needed to reduce the burden in the government, then they need to use more resources, which is in this case is not maybe enough. And to do so, sometimes they increase taxes or tab on penalties and fees in a somehow, and as you know, all this as they shock the economy with these kind of decisions, affecting the real income of people. So the poverty line will be getting also higher and higher in these countries. So more people will come from mid-income to the poverty line because of the government policies. And with the social pressure, sometimes the government move from designing policies to executing some of the operations that related to the economy, like housing or whatever, which is, as you know, the efficiency of government investment is less. We conduct a study during my work at the IMF, try to compare public investment in developing country and developed and oil resource, and with the private sector. the conclusion, sometimes public investment reduce the efficiency in the whole economy, and also it's inefficient compared to the private sector. Lately, the IMF published a study, the conclusion of it, about a third of what been spent globally in infrastructures from the government is a waste. In developing country, which is Middle East, among them, more than 50% is a waste. So such kind of policies, maybe we need to, I don't know how can we include it here or how can we link it, but it's really important to focus also on it. Otherwise, we will not be able to reach the main goal from such kind of platform or index to increase the social protectionism, because at the end, government, they do not have enough resources to do it. Thank you. An excellent work. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Raja. It's not a very nice picture, but I agree with you that this is something that we, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
So the picture that you depicted is not very favorable, but I agree with you that it wouldn't make much sense claiming that we need bigger safety nets and more social protection if in the end there are no means to ensure that this happens. So the two streams cannot just go in parallel. We really need to make the connection between the two parts. Let me now move to the next speaker. I would like to invite Aboubaker Benslimane, sorry, entrepreneur in the health management business and agribusiness, to bring in the view from the private sector. Please. Thank you,
Cinzia. And I would like also to thank Rim and all the team for their invitation, because I'm very happy and very glad to be here with all these incredible researchers and heard about their work and heard about what they do day by day. And I'm happy to be there in this panel to discuss about safety nets. When we talk about safety nets, I immediately think about this incredible entrepreneur who developed the MEMEDZA project in South Africa. The MEMEDZA project is a safety technology designed for the most vulnerable population in South Africa, allowing township residents, just by pressing an emergency button, to warn their family or their neighbors in case of an attack in their home. So this project is for me like a summary of all the entrepreneurial power in Africa and all the potential of entrepreneurship to solve problems that have outgrown the public authorities. So with the COVID and now the war in Ukraine, the new digital and ecological revolution has been drastically accentuated, and Africa entrepreneurial dynamics are the real benefits for all the humanity. The first thing, which we can call like traditional thing, it's the capacity of Africa to feed the world. 60% of the remaining Arab land in the world are in Africa. It is therefore essential to support the African youth to take this opportunity in the most remote corners through training, financing, and especially consideration. And this is where financial inclusion is extremely important. Because if the farmer does not have the ability to access to finance and to buy equipment and to facilitate or optimize his production, or that the same farmer doesn't know the disease risk of his production, he will always be exploited. The second and less tangible is the ability of African people to manage and animate communities. Indeed, with the advent of the digital world, the new economy is completely based on community dynamics, communities of practice, communities of knowledge, etc. And it's not for nothing that today all the companies have a community manager. However, all these dynamics already exist in Africa, traditionally. We have the family, the tribe, the ethnic communities, the religious communities, and more generally, the way of people in Africa lives. So we can see that crowdfunding is digitalization of the tontine mechanism in Africa. Uber Pool is digitalization of the red cab method in Casablanca. BlaBlaCar exists since the caravans. And Tinder is nothing else than this aunt that we all have and that wants to match us with his girl or his son. Nevertheless, with the crisis, experiences since 3 years now, we have seen the vulnerability of African entrepreneurs, mainly due to the lack of financing and social protection mechanisms. When the first wave of COVID started and the world had to be confined, I was working with an investment fund dedicated to African startups, and we spent the whole confinement in Zoom with the entrepreneur we had invested in to see how we can help them to pass the cap. Because from one day to the next, they have no money coming in, but salary, expense, credits, interest, and other charges to pay. And I can tell you that I have been impressed by the courage that this entrepreneur shows. There is a motorcycle company in Mali whose name is Teleman, has transformed his drivers into deliverymen. Other companies in the digital sector have transformed into IT consultants. Other company in textiles into mask producer. So, and all this in a record times. But today, the main problem for African entrepreneurs is the price of the raw material and the energies. Whether it's the price of agricultural inputs that raise the price of products and foods, or the increasing price of construction materials blocking projects and putting the builders on their numerous subscribers in a very complicated situation, will certainly lead to a total redefinition of our model, or for me, only the mutualization of resources and orders as that the European Union has done lately is essential, but it is also important not to fall into in excessive national sovereignty beneficial today to the country of the North. So all this to say that the solutions are there with this little object. So this little object is equivalent to this home of computer 30 years ago. So with this little object, we that can be at the same time a bank, a school, a doctor, a supermarket, and an office. And the Africans entrepreneurs have understood it well and have already revolutionized the world by creating the mobile wallets. So it is therefore essential now to public authorities and large international institutions to accelerate and to accentuate the investment of structures that can facilitate all this. Because without road, it is difficult to have e-commerce. But on the other hand, if it takes too much time, I'm confident on the ability of entrepreneurs to find solutions. As the company was named Zeppelin, which deliver medicines and blood to remote Rwanda village by drone, without roads. And to conclude, I will take the advantage of being in the company of many talented academics to make a call for collaboration, because there is so many studies and models developed in universities and or research centers, but as entrepreneurs, we don't have any idea of any information about it. So I think it's time to stop to flooding the world ecosystem and work together for the creation of a real one, because the most important things for an entrepreneur is to have the right information at the right time.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, and I found it quite refreshing with some positive notes, but also clearly for a call for basically, I think, public intervention, I would say, mostly for infrastructure, because I agree with you that you can't expect private entrepreneurs to take care of infrastructure. Infrastructure need to be provided by the public sector in order to make possible for the private sector actually to deliver, and sometimes really to provide goods and services that governments are not able to offer for a number of reasons. Let's now move to Tarik Yousef. Is Director of the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and non-resident Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institute. Welcome, Tarik. And I would like to give you the opportunity also to bring in your view. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cinzia, and thanks to the organizers for providing me with the opportunity to be a part of your policy discussion on social protection and related issues. I've listened to the intervention so far. I looked closely at the presentation, and I have observed and listened to the discussants and their input. And I find myself largely in agreement with the importance of this work, with the timeliness of this work, and with the complexity of policy interventions and the impact of any policy intervention in bringing it from the design stage to the implementation stage, to the monitoring and evaluation stage, to the refinement stage. I think much of what I've heard is exactly how I would frame the issues. I would add my voice to those calling for precision, accuracy, and reliability. Having said that, I feel the need to add a few additional comments broadly on the subject and on this specific topic. Perhaps comment number one that would be relevant for thinking about not just social protection in general, in our part of the world or in Africa. But as Cinzia sort of reminded us in contextualizing the discussion, thinking about social protection at this particular moment in time. And what can be done about it, measuring it, getting a handle on this particular moment. I say that is important because one cannot underestimate or underemphasize or overemphasize, for that matter, the magnitude of the shocks that the MENA region has felt in the last 3 to 4 years, starting with the COVID shock, the pandemic recession, the immense economic dislocation that took place during that period, much of which remains unaccounted for, much of which remains only measured at a very high level without the specific details and the numbers that would allow us to capture the damage that had been inflicted on socioeconomic outcomes in the region. Damage that I would suggest probably set some segments of the population in the region a decade behind in terms of erasing the gains of an entire decade for segments of the population, especially the vulnerable, the marginalized, the poor, and those that are more isolated. At the beginning of this year, obviously, we thought a recovery will be underway. We could not wait for this recovery to happen fast enough. It was meant to be the beginning of addressing the issues, of dealing with the issues, taking stock of where things are, only for the region to be further buffeted by multiple other economic and financial shocks. Commodity price shocks were mentioned, but also the financial market shocks, not to be underestimated. Already one of the discussants pointed at the potential for debt servicing burdens and servicing needs to become exuberantly expensive for many parts of the region. So a year into what was supposed to be a recovery, we're looking at some very dire conditions facing many non-oil exporting countries in the region. And unfortunately, the outlook for the next year or two is not exactly bright either. We're potentially looking at further deterioration in not just fiscal and financial conditions, but in what governments can or have the capacity to do to beef up their social protection systems, respond adequately, respond robustly, and on time to what could become a very troubling and problematic set of outcomes at the socio-economic level when we think of social protection. I am particularly interested in food security. I've been paying attention to this over the last 12 months, and I'm already alarmed by what is being reported by non-governmental entities in the region, surveys that have been done, some of which took place before the war on Ukraine, in fact, before the commodity price shocks manifested themselves. One survey in particular done in 8 countries in the non-oil exporting region of MENA. The result of the survey runs as follows. Something between 53% and 68% of those surveyed indicated that they have run out of food before they had more money to replenish their food needs. And if you were to relax the definition, you're getting 70%, 75% on average of people reporting different levels of food insecurity. This, again, is before the full impact of the war in Ukraine took place. So extrapolating for that and imagining what could be taking place right now in the context of the MENA region is an important task, but one that leads us to the obvious conclusion that whatever shocks have accumulated in the region right now, they are such that they could become huge drivers of social unrest, socioeconomic setbacks, and further destabilize and weaken governments that are already stressed. Perhaps the biggest problem we face as researchers and policy analysts and thinking about these issues is that we're dealing with the least transparent governments in the world today. Most governments in MENA suffer from not just capacity deficits when it comes to data assembly and data tracking, data provision. They happen to also be systematically non-transparent, which means that for researchers and for the policymakers themselves, the task of trying to understand what's happening to social protection is handicapped at the start. If you don't know what's happening, then how can you design policies? And how can you then target those who are most in need of policy interventions, especially at a time when you are fiscally constrained? And so, unfortunately, even though we're talking about social protection and we want to address and provide answers and raise the right questions, we face all the difficulties and the challenges that you would face in any other topic in the MENA region, in part because of the policy issues, because of the transparency, and because of the susceptibility of the region to massive economic shocks, as has taken place during COVID, and now, and with an outlook that suggests that we might be, as the world economy heads into a recession, seeing more difficult conditions ahead. This is a call for us to double down on our efforts, but to seek alternative ways than trying to necessarily work through traditional government institutions that may not actually be in a position to provide answers or to help facilitate the collection of information that we need to understand what is happening out there. Perhaps I'll stop here with the set of remarks and look forward to the rest of our discussion today.
Thanks a lot, Tarik, I actually cannot agree more with what you say. I also would like to emphasize one point you made, which I think is very important, and the fact that energy prices and food prices started to increase well before the war started. So the war has actually resulted in an acceleration. Now prices started to go down, but we are still very much above the average of the last 15 years. Food, I think that the World Bank food indicator is very close to the level of the time of the Arab Spring. So just to say that how alarming actually these numbers are. But I would like now to open the floor for questions. I actually have a few remarks on the presentation made by Yeganeh and Najat with maybe a few suggestions, but I don't want to abuse my position. So if there is any question in the room, maybe we start, and then I'll also provide few comments. Anyone in the room? Otherwise, I break the ice.
Start.
Please.
Thank you, Cinzia. I wish you were with us. Thank you all. It was a very interesting and very rich panel with a lot of information. So first, I would like to congratulate you on this dashboard. It's really an impressive data work. And I really like the culture dimension, because it was never considered in such I mean, in the policy debate in general, and it's very important. So I think this is very nice. Two points. I think that perhaps one of the things that might be also of interest when it comes to social protection and social policies is the fiscal space. Because the problem of most of our economies is that social policies, as we were discussing yesterday, Najat, that most of them are very reactive, not proactive. And this means that they are not really streamlined in the conception of macro policies. So perhaps taking into consideration the fiscal space itself, and perhaps, I don't know whether we can have a fiscal rule that will guarantee that the structure of public spending will be more allocated, let's say, to some productive spending rather than current spending, more on social spending rather than non-social spending, something in this line. I think it will show to what extent the macro mindset is taken into consideration in the social protection. And I think this point was raised by Raja in the beginning. And the second, and that's more of a question to all of you, and perhaps also to Tarik on that. I think also one of the problems in the region is that most of the policies that are always adopted are very stabilization policies. We have a crisis, we react to these policies just to stabilize the economy without really addressing the deep root causes of the problem, or without having more allocation policies. And this means that we have the classical problem of time inconsistency, where perhaps some policies can be optimal in the short term, but they become not optimal, or perhaps second best in the long run, or we perhaps might deviate even from the long run. So from your perspective, especially at the social level, how such time inconsistency can be resolved, given that once we finish a crisis, we have another one. We finish COVID, we finished the Arab Spring, we have COVID, we finish COVID, we have the war in Ukraine, which means that we'll be always very reactive, in the sense that we'll always adapt stabilization policies without trying to address the long-term problems and avoiding this time inconsistency. Thank you.
Many thanks, Shahir. Is there any other comment? Maybe a collective couple? Yeah.
Yes, please, Cinzia, if a very short comment and suggestion. So thank you for presenting the proposal to have the social inclusion and well-being index. It's of course very welcome. I didn't have time to go through all of it. So eventually what I'm saying is already covered under the index. But for sure, I would recommend to have something on intergenerational fairness. So including one dimension of intergenerational fairness or intergenerational social inclusion. So will be, of course, highly relevant. Also addressing the comments by Shahir on the intertemporal dimension of policies, and also trying to basically combine to what extent social inclusion and well-being in the present are compromising or not social inclusion and well-being in the future. So this is, I think, something that needs to, of course, societies will have different preferences regarding fairness, and even the concept of fairness is different within countries. So there will be for sure discussions on what does it mean fairness for different countries. But okay, directly or indirectly considering for intergenerational solidarity or fairness for sure is I think probably we would complement what is already there. Thank you. Probably is already there. So.
Thanks a lot, Jorge.
Cynthia, have a question. I mean, I don't know, comment or a question to the panelist. And this question actually I made to the keynote speaker yesterday, but I wanted to delve into it this afternoon at the panel discussion as well. It's about really the safety net concept and linking also this to trying to find if we talk about social protection, social inclusion, there is always this trade-off between equity and efficiency. But then if we want to go a bit beyond these two, equity versus efficiency, and introduce the concept of resilience, how can we, for example, think of developing a safety net, which could be a buffer, in good times, like we do, for example, in finance. In good time, you accumulate capital for resilience, for a resilient financial system. And then you use it in the bad times, practically. So this is what we call procyclical buffers. And then we can apply the same thinking, whereby we have in good times, of course, now we don't have so many good times. Probably we should have done this in the past, but then let's think in the future. So developing some sort of procyclical system for safety net, which is accumulated over the cycle in good times to be spent in the bad times. And then we reduce the capacities of these countries, for example, to over-indebt themselves. Because we see, for example, and I agree with Shahir about the fiscal space. I mean, all these countries, they do not have fiscal space nowadays. Actually, they are in discussions to restructure and to default practically. So it means that they will even have much less capacity to have even funding. I don't even talk about cheap funding, because this is their funding, they're always expensive funding. But then in the future, they don't even have liquidity from the financial market. So how can they be really able to practically design a social policy? Now, another problem which I see, and this is my second question to the panelists, of course, the IMF is a bailout. I mean, they bail them out. Of course, when they bail out, you have to have austerity measures. Now, having austerity measures when you are in extreme shock situations, this is not really the way forward, because we are not in macroeconomic conditions which are benign. We are in extreme macroeconomic conditions where we need to have, we need to rethink the austerity measures. Of course, there are moral hazards, and we know it very well. But then if it is really crafted in such a way that we cannot, for example, nowadays lift subsidies on energy, increasing cost and food increasing costs. So you see, we need to think of what I call flexible strategies, specifically when you enter into these bailout plans for debt restructuring, to ensure that these countries, they really don't enter into what I call a gloomy scenario for so many years, and then you will have social unrest, increasing poverty and increasing inequality. And then we are really going, in fact, into a trap. So this is what probably we need to think of: flexible policies when macroeconomic conditions are extreme. So what do you think about that?
Thanks a lot, Rim. If you allow me, I add a couple of points and then I hand over to Yeganeh and Najat to give her the opportunity to react to these many questions. Let me share a couple of thoughts with you based on the work I've done the last couple of years in general on social policy, on stabilization policies in Europe. Maybe some ideas could be applied also for Africa. So the first point I would like to make is that more and more, when we think of social policy, at least in economic literature, but also in actual policy, we tend to make a distinction between social protection and social investments. So social protection is the safety net, basically, that it comes in. Is it the system, most likely a kind of insurance system or redistributional, because basically you redistribute from the richer to the poorer, that protects in the case of shocks. And then you have social investment, which is basically education, health, labor market policies, which are a set of policies that should help to empower people and to be ready to face shocks. Because if you are educated, if you have access to health, you can face shocks in a better way than if you have nothing. So the more you foster social investment in society, the more people should be prepared to face shock, and in principle, you build a resilient society. So this is much easier to say than to do, but this is one stream of thinking in separating really the safety net from investing in people. This brings me to a second point, which is also related to the dashboard, which is two elements: well-being and social inclusion. So well-being, I think it was mentioned by George, is a concept which is very individualistic. So the focus is really on the person and how he perceives his or her situation. Social inclusion is an element whereby the individual becomes part of society and can interact in the society. So I think you need to be careful in combining these two concepts, which are actually quite distinct. When it comes to social inclusion, maybe just a suggestion again, based on the indicator I've been looking at Eurostat as. So Eurostat looks at it in a negative way. So they look at the risk of exclusion. And basically there are a number of sub-indicators. Most of them are monetary. So it's basically monetary deprivation, which isolate people from society because it becomes very difficult to interact with others. So if you are deprived by basically goods or services. And then there is again the social elements, all the elements that makes you able to interact with society, including going to school. So one way to organize the indicators maybe is to look at other examples, because I think the set is super interesting, but it will be very difficult to get a sense of direction, because indicators are very different. Some could move in a direction, some could move in order, and it will be very difficult to come up with a conclusion. Are we moving towards more social integration or less? So maybe you will have to make a selection of core indicators and a selection of complementary indicators. And for the core, you may have even a composite indicator, which I think is an option that you already consider. And then I think I will leave it here. Sorry, it was very long, but the topic is extremely interesting and the contributions and super interesting. So I couldn't resist. Najat, Yeganeh, the floor is yours for responding to the many comments.
I start with the last point, probably that, you know, one of the main points you made about like having why mixing well-being and social inclusion. We had this discussion with Najat for a long time, many times, social inclusion or well-being. And then we said, okay, they're different, but for me, well-being sometimes creates social inclusion creates well-being in a source. So it leads to somehow people's well-being when they are good in a society, when they're included, when they're contributed, that when it leads to human dignity and so on, it leads to the well-being. So I think the ultimate goal is to have people's well-being, but then through social inclusion. So yes, but we will take this into account. We may discuss the point once again and try to find the best among the two. But I think between the two, I will go for well-being, because the idea also is to have this holistic approach, having different pillars, all the facets through this well-being of the society at the end of the day, which is our final goal. I have like another point about this, because it's related to some of the questions, that within the dashboard, we have this indicator for the income pillar. We have one pillar on income, and we indicate inside the dependency ratio. But probably it's not very obvious. We do have that because we want to have in mind that in countries where we have old age dependency ratio, we don't have this mechanism of, it's not possible to do like intergenerational transfers. And in the countries where we have young age dependency ratio, well, it can be like a political option and so on. So Shahir, you asked about like having a fiscal space to be added, and I'm thinking about what sort of indicator we can include, and it should go within the this income also as well, because then it increases the government's capacity to finance social inclusion schemes. And the idea of the RIM about having this more resilience added in the dashboard and how to think about it, I think that's why the dashboard is so crucial. That's why we're working on it, because we want to make the data available. And this was also related to the last slide of Najat yesterday about having data available. And also it goes well with the work of what said Tarik about that in these in the target countries that we are working in. It's very, transparency is not something which is we can expect for. And I think that's most of the things I wanted to say. I have one question. Now that I have the microphone, I take this opportunity. No, it's about it, because you talked about like digital being the solution at the end of the day. I mean, so that we can do, and entrepreneurs can do a lot with just a mobile phone, and digital gives us like a huge opportunities that because we are talking about, we have high debt, we have this problem, we are facing multiple shocks, so we are needing like a miracle solution, and digital may be that. But within the digital, it's like, for me, double-edged sword. I mean, we should invest, of course. I'm not going to debate that. But many governments are reluctant, I think, because of the problems related to cybersecurity, and also this sovereignty, digital sovereignty, which is a problem. And in the countries we have like big companies like Google and so on, they're controlling all the data. And for our countries, it's like a very huge threat, not being able to control over this powerful tool within the economy. So countries are probably somehow reluctant, and even for political reasons, we want to have control over internet because we want to have control over people. But controlling internet, which means bad access to the infrastructure. So it's like contradictory, and we have to tackle digital divide, because this is something we have a lot in these countries, women, I mean, among different areas, rural, poor. But if we don't tackle it, we contribute to higher inequality. So those who have access, they grow. Those who don't, they remain where they are. So it's
okay. Thank you, Yeganeh. I have 1 minute. And then I can give the floor to my colleague. I hope to be very quick. So just a few maybe information about what we just said about social protection. So social protection is not only safety net. Social protection provide insurance and assistance. When we talk about safety net is assistance, and I completely agree. We need to have a specific policy about safety net, and not only during the time when we have crisis, when we have this big shock, because we have in all country different category of people who need assistance. So this must be a policy that we have to implement everywhere. This is my opinion, okay? And insurance is linked, as you know, to labor markets, to contract, to employment contract. And it's all the system that we have almost everywhere is insurance completely linked to employment and to formal employment. And as you know, in our region, in Middle East, North Africa, in African country, we have a very high level of informality. So if we could implement policy to reduce informality, we will extend the fiscal space. This is the first point. And I completely agree with Rim. We need a fiscal strategy, and we need also a diversified mechanism. We cannot always think about, we have a state, and the state has to take care about all the expenses that we have in one economy. So this means that a diversified mechanism means that we have to involve public sector, private sectors, and individual. And with this kind of diversified mechanism, we will reduce the debt, linked to only one entity. And I really liked what Aboubaker said about entrepreneurship. And in many countries, in African countries, we can see this different informal mechanism that people develop to take care about different kind of risk, and health risk, death risk. And this is a very good example about what we can do. But this kind of mechanisms are often running in the short term, and it's completely different. With this kind of risk, it's long-term risk. We need to have policy in the long term, and we are working on some mechanisms, some solutions that maybe we could implement in developing country, but not only in developing country, also in developed country. So I give you the floor now. I stop.
Thanks a lot. I'm looking at the organizers. I think we need to close because you will have
It's okay. We negotiated some extra minutes for the lights. So you have a little bit of time. And I think there are some questions on the chat. I don't know if you have.
There are a couple of comments, questions on the chat. If you allow me, I would like to give the opportunity to the panelists to react. Is there anyone who would like to react to what has been said? Maybe one minute each.
Okay.
Yeah.
First, let me tap on the fiscal space and the suggestion to be included in the dashboard. In reality, I do not agree with, because if we think about fiscal space problem in our region, it's a result of the government behavior most of the time. So if we have it in the dashboard, it will give a good excuse for the government to reduce their contribution for the social protections. So I think it's not should be there, but we should think about how to solve and how to think about improving the fiscal space. So let's go to the fundamentals and see the main cause, which I tried to touch on it in my early talk, that because of the behavior of the government, because the government basically not maximizing the welfare of people, maximizing its power, its control, as you just mentioned, then this is increase the risk, increase the uncertainty, the cost in business and NGO in the economy. So the resources not well utilized. So how can we shift from this thinking to more maximizing the welfare and reducing this risk, which sometimes created a problem and the government need to interfere and to support using some financial support, which is with a small fiscal space is create a real problem. I agree IMF with Reem. I think IMF in their bailout, they focused on the government space, the fiscal space and the monetary policy and fiscal policy. This is the main focus. I think they should include also the social, either a poverty or any social indicators that will help on creating a balance between what they propose to support the government or to maintain the government level of strength in their fiscal and monetary policy with the social. So such kind of a balance may be really needed to avoid it. Digital economy, I think we are heading to this direction, has no option. So without creating the right infrastructures, or at least the minimum, then the competitiveness of such an economy will be less. It will be taken by other economy who will have more advanced in digital economy. As you know, this is industrial revolutions is going on. It will create its negative and positive impact. I think the World Bank has a big project about the digital economy in the region in Africa specifically, and they try to do a survey analyzing the current status and what's need to be recommended. So I think digital economy need to be utilized. Think of at least some of the resources should go there. I know that there is no fiscal space, and sometimes these countries, they have a problem with the minimum infrastructure that's needed. What about some kind of a digital economy? But with the thinking of including PPP, public-private partnership, it will reduce the burden on the government, and then will give more room for the private sector to engage on the economy and maintaining at least the growth that may be needed, at least the minimum, instead of just the government try to kick the private sector away and using them as a contractor more than as an investors. So in infrastructures, maybe we need to shift this mentality, have the right policies, right regulations to go this way. I think I covered most of that.
Thanks very much. Aboubaker?
Yes, I will just answer to the question. Just to correct the misunderstood, is that it's not the digital who is the solution, it's the entrepreneur who is in the digital, who is the digital. Digital need to be only a tool, not a solution. And but the fact is that if today the government or the public authorities don't do nothing, the private will do it. So we see already Facebook in Africa who are pushing like internet everywhere for free, just because it's not for free because it's Facebook, but they do it just because if people have access to internet, they will use Facebook and they will want like that. So if the government or the authorities don't do nothing, someone else will do it. It's like the same thing that we have it, but more like essentially in Rwanda, we don't have roads. So some entrepreneurs take like drones to give medicine. And I will finish with like a little exchange that I had with a woman in Africa, old woman who were analphabets, and she told me that with this new phone, it's amazing because they have WhatsApp. They can read, they can't write, but they can send a vocal message to his son to bring her some medicines from the town. just this it's completely amazing.
Yeah, thanks very much also for bringing in these very real life examples. Tarik, last word for you.
Yes, so I mean, I'm largely in agreement with everything I've heard, and I think we all would like to see more fiscal space. We would like to have rules that protect social protection and social insurance, and we'd like to see our governments move in the direction of better targeting, better measurement, and more effective policies. But the context also matters. And I think if you've been through a couple of massive economic and developmental shocks in the span of a few years, and now you're looking at an entirely different geopolitical context globally, and where there are more and more questions about the future of free trade and markets and future government interventions, and all of this, I think, suggests that whatever we think about and whatever we try to do by way of informing the design, advising policymakers, we should be very pragmatic. We should be very practical. We should not aim for perhaps what is perfect and what's ideal, and seek opportunities for where we might be able to make a difference. I am not particularly optimistic about the ability of the region to alleviate or deal with the set of headwinds that it's facing now and will face over the next few years. But within those constraints, to the extent that something can be done to help ensure that at least the region gets by, that the damage is minimal, and that the right lessons are taken moving forward, I think we will be moving in the right direction. And having a dashboard with the right information, even if that information is not perfect, is one important ingredient in this exercise. But we do live in unusually uncertain times all around, not just from the social protection prism, but from the entirety of development policy and development outcomes at the regional and international levels. And I think that context should be kept before our eyes as we seek to influence and inform policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all. I think we put on the table very important trade-offs. So with need for more social protection and for safety nets as the frequency of shocks seems to increase. We are also aware of the capacity of governments to intervene and to have adequate resources. So we need to think of new ways of responding to this trade-off. So Rim clearly put some ideas on the table, and the idea of the dashboard and the indicators will not solve itself the trade-off, but I think it's a necessary condition to properly address the trade-off. So go ahead with this idea. It will certainly bring some fruits. And on this, I close the session. Thanks very much to all of you. And I hand over to Rim.